Okay, Jin, thank you for coming. I wanted to basically have an informal conversation with you and to ask for your opinion on different things. Um, we go back a long time when we were doing our postdocs in New York at Cornell.
That was exact 20 years ago.
20 years ago. The big word back then was anterior cingulate cortex. For many years since, it has remained the big word, anterior cingulate cortex, for cognition, for emotion, cognitive resolution, cognitive monitoring, the whole thing, Jonathan Cohen, Michael Posner. And over the years, it sort of faded, but still it remains. Still people talk about it and so on. Has your views on the anterior cingulate cortex changed dramatically or in a big way since 20 years ago?
Yes, that's true, because we have been studying the anterior insular cortex instead of anterior cingulate cortex, right? We have shown that anterior insular cortex is the bottleneck of cognitive control instead of the anterior cingulate cortex. In that sense, we have the second structure to be focused on.
How does that, how would talking about the anterior cingulate cortex versus the structure that we are now talking about, how would they differ, or what is the relationship between them?
So both anterior insular cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, they belong to the limbic system. However, they show the activation at the same time when you challenge them with the cognitive control tasks, right? However, we show that although they both activated, the AIC, the anterior insular cortex, is the bottleneck. It's in two ways, a positive way or negative way. So when you have a lot of information coming to your brain, so you have to limit the information to be processed, right? So in that sense, anterior insular cortex is doing the positive way, means limiting the information to be further processed by your consciousness. But another negative way means that when you're driving, so you have limited capacity to take phone calls when you're driving. So that's both negative and positive way. So, the rule of ACC, maybe our model showing that the ACC is the limbic system, is a motor system for the output. So for the output system, you may have some kind of duplication with other brain structures. That said that if you have damage of anterior cingulate cortex, you may not be able to show the deficit in terms of the behavior. Mm-hmm. But for AIC, it's the only of the unique limbic input sensory system. And then if you have damage of AIC, the anterior insular cortex, and then you have problem with your information processing, namely the cognitive control.
Do you find that most of the theories that we were thinking about in terms of, for example, the dorsal part of the ACC versus the caudal part and stuff like that, cognition versus emotion stuff, do you think that some of it applies to the AIC?
Yes, for the AIC, as I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, the AIC has one part, for the cognitive processing, and another more inferior part is for the emotional processing. So that's the basic current understanding of it. So we have some studies confirm that kind of separation, but typically we talk about the AIC. We don't talk about the cognition versus emotion, because the integration of cognition emotion is in the similar area.
Back in the early 2000s, you were one of the first people to come out with a paper that basically mapped out the entire ACC and showed how different studies show different activations in different areas of the ACC. Back then, it was a big deal.
No, that's for Mike.
Mike. It was Jin Fan and Mike. Yeah, both of you together. And that paper was, basically considered a classic in the field for a long time. Do you think that we can do the same thing for the AIC?
Yes, for sure we can do it. Because the AIC has, as I mentioned, one portion called anterior insular cortex, but the inferior portion we call frontal insular cortex. Right? We can also, formally, to examine the hypothesis about the differentiation, dissociation of emotion versus cognition in the anterior insular cortex.
Mm-hmm. In a way, a lot of the, I would say, big promise of the ACC has been replaced by talking about the AIC now. Initially, also, there was, at least for some period of time, there was a talk about the ACC versus the posterior cingulate cortex and the connection between them, also about default mode processing and things like that. Does the AIC have some kind of a sister node in the back that sort of works with it? And what is the, the functional neuroanatomy that plays a role with the AIC?
Yeah, I think your question is very interesting because the ACC has a mirror part of a PCC, posterior cingulate cortex, right? So when you have damage of ACC, maybe you have, the spare system of a PCC to function, at least once activated, once deactivated, vice versa, right? However, we did not find any structure similar as this. Maybe we have some somatosensory area, mimic a little bit with the anterior insular cortex, but there are not other structures closely, functions as the AIC.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that the AIC today is a node that should be investigated specifically in the context of consciousness?
Yes, that's also the topic I'm going to talk about tomorrow. We argue that the AIC is important to mediate the external world and the internal world, and then to mediate what we call the interoceptive awareness.
What do you mean by that? So interoceptive awareness is something that has been thrown around by many people. Mm-hmm. By listening to the word, it sounds like it has to do with something about internal stimuli or internal information that's coming from within. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, for example, if you see a tiger in somewhere, running toward your black bear, and then you have the response, you see it, you process it, and then you have a visual response, to the visual input. And then the visual input, has one path to, for the cognitive processing. And then also the interoceptive awareness, is going to process, your fear or your bodily response in order to integrate with outside the information, and then you generate what we call the fear. And then this is important. We call interoceptive awareness, important for your surviving, and important for the emotional life.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that some people have more developed AICs than others, or do you feel that that's something that could be developed? Could you enhance it? Could you train it? Could you stimulate it? Are there certain drugs that you can take or certain exercises that you could do?
Yeah, for drug, I don't know, but for the exercise, for the meditation, so there are some, studies showing that when you practice meditation, so you can enhance or enlarge the volume of anterior insular cortex, you have better understanding of your body or interoceptive awareness, and then it's going to help with you for your for your symptoms, for example, anxiety or worry, or other symptoms related to OCD and other clinical symptoms. So in that sense, and this kind of practice may help you to enhance your interoceptive awareness. Meanwhile, by possibly enlarge your AIC, and then eventually will maybe you feel better. I don't know whether that's the correct word.
Do we have some animal models that allow us to look at AIC in other species? In other words, can we look at AIC functioning in non-humans?
Yeah, there is the special neuron called the Van-Calman neuron. That kind of special neuron is a long projection neuron. You can only find them in monkeys, human beings, and the monkeys, and chimpanzee, and the elephants, and some whales, and then there are social animals, right? So
social animals being dolphins, or
yeah,
mm-hmm.
They may have those kind of neurons. So if you have those neurons, and then the AIC has a more speedy or fast reaction to the social world, and then important with our social life.
So do we feel that these neurons are sort of necessary for conscious computations or for the phenomenology of consciousness? Without these neurons, it would be difficult to compute things that would go into the conscious sphere?
It's hard to see. So if you argue with some animals, for example rats, they may not have consciousness. That's hard to see. But based on John Allman's, studies, because those neurons, they are important for the, fast or, like a social scenario for the information process, the social information. In that sense, possibly is important or is critical for the, for the consciousness.
Mm. In terms of methodology, when we started out, the whole field of cognitive neuroscience was young enough that we would normally do some kind of a behavioral study, look at things like accuracy and reaction time, things like that, and try to have also an objective measure that would come from imaging. It could be EEG, it could be fMRI, or something else. Do you think that things have changed from 20 years ago, and today we have methodology that is substantially different?
I think now we have more powerful called machine learning, and then we can like do more data mining, and then to analyze the human brain, for example, the mind reading, and then in that sense, the development of methodology is not dramatic. Still, we have the origin tool to study, but for data analysis, we have more way, more method to use so that we can understand, the human brain better.
I think in 2003, I might be not remembering the date exactly, Mike Posner and you published a very interesting paper where you're looking at MRI or fMRI as the actual activation by which to go, and using that as the phenotype, not just behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we've moved closer to that? Because back then, I'll just contextualize my question a little bit better. Back then, there was a very famous paper by George Bush, the scientist, mm-hmm. and he basically showed that if you look at ADHD kids versus non-ADHD kids, their output the behavioral output is exactly the same on some particular task, but the neural correlates are very different. The ADHD kids were using a lot more the insula in that particular paper and so on. So that sort of created this notion that maybe instead of looking at behavior, which actually looks the same, we should be looking at brain function, and that should be more of the yardstick by which we should go. Do you think that that's happening more today, or we should be happening more?
I think so, because we can, study the behavior directly, and also by examining, the patterns, MVP and multivariate pattern analysis, right? We can really further examine, the specific or the small fine-scale structures in predicting human behavior. That's still the brain-behavior relationship, but we have the tool nowadays to further study it.
Mm. When we're looking back 2 decades ago, it was the beginning of genotyping. It was the beginning of looking at how particular allele constellations or particular genes, candidate genes, correlate with particular types of behavior, if it's attention behavior or something like that. The genomics have gone through a revolution, big revolution, and now we can do analysis of SNPs and many things very, very quickly. Do you feel that our particular field has exploded as a result of this? Because back then, Michael Posner was one of the pioneers of this particular idea of trying to genotype and phenotype at the same time. Do you feel that we have really come a long way and we have a better understanding of what's happening now?
No, I don't have specific comments on this, because I lost the track of the literature, because our colleague withdraw from this field, mm-hmm. and then I stopped doing it. But for my feeling is that we don't have that big progress in this direction.
In that regard, and I agree with you, in that regard, sometimes even though we have a huge technological drive for a particular thing, in this particular case human genetics, it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the kind of work that we do in terms of the ability to use this genetic information to illuminate behavior or even brain structure or brain connectivity. What do you think about imaging as a field? Do you think that imaging has delivered? Do you think that from the time that we started futzing around with the MRI magnets and EEG, and even today we have other types of imaging, it doesn't really matter. Do you think that imaging is the way, or do you think there's a different way?
There are different ways, but in terms of imaging, I think the imaging studies contribute what they should contribute to the understanding of the human brain. But now if you have a more innovative ways to understand the brain, for sure we are going to use it. So that's why I think now the image study now is reached plateau. So we need to figure out a new way or innovative method to further push the development of the understanding of the human brain.
You have the experience of working both in a psychology department and a medical school, and you've seen things from both a clinical direction and working with physicians, with psychiatrists, with neurologists, and so on, going through the NIH on very clinical programs and so on. And you have done also, very basic research that has to do with people who are just studying psychological science. And how do you feel that these things balance out when it comes to cognitive neuroscience? Do you feel that cognitive neuroscience has a lot to offer, let's say, to clinicians? Do you think that clinicians have a lot to offer to cognitive neuroscience?
I think from each direction, for clinician, you can really contribute, or from patients, we can understand, the disruption or deficit in terms of cognition to inform us to generate a new model, new hypothesis related to the cognition of the human brain. So and from other direction, so because we understand the brain now more deeply, so we can offer some specific strategies for the treatment. So we are getting there very close.
Most of the work that you have done over the past 20 years is extremely specific in the sense that you are taking a particular topic and you're really going in deeply into it, whereas other people are sort of making a career by making a number of things. So for example, my career has been taking a few things and working on them. So if it's hypnosis, if it's attention, several things like that, and working in parallel. You have a tendency to take something and to really study it very deeply and very meaningfully. Do you think that in a way the future of the field is in sort of an integrative synthesis of fields, or do you think that it's about taking one thing and running with it very, very deeply?
Yeah, I think you have to first have a broad understanding of the field, right? And then you deep into it, more deeply. So that's the way I think, that's the way I think the best.
In terms of populations and working with populations, we have worked with Mike Posner on a number of ideas that had to do with children, a number of ideas that had to do with older individuals. Do you think that there's a particular population that is more telling than others in terms of certain questions? So for example, let's say we're talking about the AIC. Would it make sense, for example, to focus on aging population, just because we're getting so many, the population is getting older and older, and we, this would have some impact on, on the actual population, it would have an applied value?
Yeah, I think the focus can be, like on different can be on different aspects. For example, we studied the cognitive control capacity. So we use, patients with mild cognitive impairment, and also we study patients with lesion of the anterior cortex. So, yeah, so it's not just from one population. We can use different populations, patient population, to provide the converging evidence to support or to test the hypothesis. So I'm not restricted to any specific population, but I'm trying to use different patient populations to test my hypothesis. That's one way to hypothesis testing, and then in other sense, we can, after we have the understanding, we can have benefit. Provide the treatment strategies to those populations.
Jin, if you could tell the whole world the story of the ant, because people have different understandings of how it came about. Maybe you can tell a little bit about what was the climate at the time, how Michael Posner came with this idea of, in his dream, if you remember, he was dreaming about this, how you took it, how you programmed it, the whole thing. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was my first project as a postdoc. We started together. So, and the help with Tobias as the professional subject, right? So we start to develop, and also your help with the opinion or the improvement. So we developed the task. It's hard to see that.
So can you tell us a little bit about how the whole thing came about. So here's a task that basically measures three things simultaneously. And with very clever subtractions is allowing us to tap into either classical executive attention, as in selection, aspects of orienting, aspects of alerting. What was the big deal when it came out?
So originally, Mike, asked me to do this because, in the Department of Psychiatry, they want to have a short task to measure all aspects of attention, the three aspects as you mentioned. And then I start to work on it to make it as short as possible, meanwhile to measure as much as possible. So after we developed that, they never use it for, psychiatry, for schizophrenia. And then we start to, share the task, around, the research community. And then people start to use it to study different clinical populations. And also later on we have the child version to study developmental populations.
Mm-hmm. Did you expect it to be so popular when you developed it and coded it and all that? Did you expect it to be so popular?
No, I didn't. So I just, like at that time, I just wanted, to, develop a short task, more efficient. And then I did not expect that we have about 3,000 citations, up to now, and also the broader, use of that task.
What extensions have you seen to the ANT since those days? It's been used by many researchers, and of course it's been criticized, which is okay. But what kind of spin-offs have you seen from the ANT? For example, I was working with a UCLA professor, Eran Zaidel, to try to create a lateralized version because he's very interested in hemispheric specialization. I know that other people were interested in an emotional version. You developed the fish version a little bit after for kids and so on. How do you see the progression of the ANT since the original inception?
Yeah, because you mentioned about the lateralized ANT, I want to mention a little bit more, because the ANT can be, the stimulus can be projected on the left or right visual field, and then can be, then input to the, if it's on the left visual field, it can be processed on right hemisphere, vice versa, right? So, and also, I didn't pay that much attention to the lateralized NT, and then until recent year, one of my postdocs started to get interested into that, and then we conduct another study to study what's so-called right hemisphere superiority for the attention, called the exact control of attention, and we did show that right hemisphere has a superiority effect. And then, we can use that model, potential to inform, some kind of treatment.
How big is the effect?
The effect itself is not that big, but it's stable, it's solid.
And significant.
Significant.
So, and this is across all people, whether they're left-handed or right-handed? Is this always there, or is it mostly for right-handed individuals?
We only studied right-handed people.
When you look at the ANT today, is there anything that you would have done differently, knowing what you know about the AIC, for example? I mean, would you do things slightly differently?
It's a good question. After we also developed the ANT, right, I tried to develop several alternative versions without Mike's input or other people, you or Tobias' input, and then I was not successful. After several years, I realized I don't like those new versions. So in that sense, I come back to the original version. On top of it, we develop a new task, which is called a short one block version, and then people can measure all the three measures in about 9 minutes. So that one, compared to original version, about 20 minutes, can be used to different studies as one of the battery items.
In most psychiatric departments, psychiatry departments that deal with patients, when a patient comes in, the first question that a psychiatrist usually asks is, should I put this person on antidepressants or should I put them on antipsychotics? It's usually not a very refined kind of thing that we are looking for with the ANT, about what kind of attention is damaged or something like that. Do you feel that the ANT is maybe too subtle a measure, and we can use it with more with healthy people and more with people who are not necessarily patients, than with patients, because one of the criticisms that I got, for example, I was at Cornell with you, then I was at Columbia Psychiatry, then I was at McGill Psychiatry, and one of the things that psychiatrists always told me is they said, this is not very practical, for to do in a clinical setting, because they're looking for things that are very, very fast and something that can give them a very quick thing. And I tried to explain to them that the whole idea here is subtlety. It's all about a very subtle thing, because at face value all attention looks the same. It's only when you probe very, very carefully that you can actually see the differences. I think that only now people are beginning to understand that, for example, when you say ADHD, it's not entirely clear what is the deficit in what kind of attention, because attention is not necessarily unitary. So although we've been talking about these things for a really long time, mostly because of the guidance of Michael Posner, I think that clinicians only now are beginning to understand that attention is not a unitary term. They begin to understand that there's a whole bunch of things there, and you can actually measure it very, very specifically. Do you feel that maybe there could be a slightly cruder version of the ant that could be useful for clinicians?
Yeah, for example, for the attention, we have alerting, orienting, and then exact control of attention, and then patient with ADHD, they show the problem with the alerting and the exact control of attention, but for patient with autism, they show the orienting function deficit and also exact control of attention. So in that sense, we can use ANT to different patient populations. However, for all the psychiatric disorders, they have the problem, the issues with exact control of attention. So if you only measure exact control of attention, you cannot differentiate them. So in that sense, in combination with other attention functions, we may be able to understand the specific symptoms better.
So you don't think that the ANT can be used as a diagnostic tool?
Depends, because if you measure the IQ, for example, right? So then you need to take about 1 hour or 2 hours, to measure. And then people, when use ANT, they tend to have a short version. If you have a short version, then the issue is that now you can reliably measure all the component, reliably. So that's question. So if you can have a long, like administration time, and then you can measure all the effects more reliably, and then I think it's going to be useful for clinical studies.
So Jin, looking into the future, if I asked you, what's the next big thing? Where do you think, if I had a lot of money and I had to put the money on the right equipment, on the right direction, just like I'm trying to do with the Brain Institute here, what do you think is the direction that is going to be the most profitable in terms of research? Where do you think most of the big discoveries are going to be?
So I'm sort of old-fashioned still, but I do think that the old-fashioned equipment, they are useful. For example, you need to have an MRI machine, you have an MEG machine, you have an EEG. So in combination with the newly developed methods such as machine learning, so you can understand the brain better. It's not that the MRI machine is old-fashioned now; it still is useful for us to understand the brain.
And when you say MRI, do you mean fMRI? Do you mean spectroscopy? Do you mean volumetric studies, anatomical studies?
Yeah, because if you have the MRI machine, you can do functional MRI, you can do an analysis anatomically, and then you can analyze spectrum, and then you can do all and DTI for the white matter. So you can analyze the brain, in different ways, or you use different measures. So it should be useful.
Do you find that things like eye tracking, pupillometry, especially pupil size of the pupil of the eye, have not been fully appreciated? For example, I decided, maybe I'm wrong, but I decided to invest quite a bit in eye tracking and pupillometry, because I think that since the 1970s or the 1980s, most people have not done a lot of pupillometry. It's become sort of a side dish rather than a main dish. And the nice thing about pupillometry is that if you have good conditions and you can control the light and everything, you basically have a way to probe people without asking them anything. I mean, they are basically talking to you with their pupils, and it's subconscious, it's involuntary, so it's a very attractive measure. And today the technology is such that we can see very, very small variations in pupil size. So personally, I think that that's a good direction to go in. Do you have other ideas like that?
Yeah, for that measure is useful for the autonomic nervous system, right? So that's a very reliable measure of your emotion reaction or your alertness. So we have been thinking about using it, and also for study emotion.
When it comes to autonomic nervous system and things like that, of course, the ACC comes again. It comes up because we know from different people and different researchers that the ACC is very active in autonomic nervous system and in autonomic activation. What is the role of the AIC in these things? I mean, do we know? Do we know if the AIC is also involved in the autonomic regulation?
We have showed the involvement or connection between autonomic nervous system and the AIC, so we feel pretty confident that AIC is involved.
Do we know how it's involved, or do we just know it's a key node in the modulation?
We don't know. That's the next step, for people to study.
When we were doing cognitive psychology, not cognitive neuroscience, you at NYU and I did at Hebrew University at the PhD level, most of the studies back then when it came to consciousness or awareness were about very speedy, sub-threshold kind of stimulation. So they would show something very, very quick, and they will demonstrate that it still affected your cognitive processing, either through semantic activation or something like that, psychophysics or something like that. That approach is now beginning to die out. Fewer people are doing that, and it's beginning to go more in other directions. What, in your opinion, is some of the best ways to sort of probe consciousness or conscious awareness?
Yeah, we try to study consciousness or conscious awareness by using the subliminal simulation. And for example, we use the CFS, continuous flash suppression, methods.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have one paper published with the negative results, so it's so hard to publish. But after we conduct that study, we realized in the literature there's one paper by David Higger showing that all current methods basically they are really to block, to try to erase or do something with your early visual cortex. Basically, the signal with the current method cannot be transferred to a deep brain structure for subconsciousness or process. In that sense, until now, we don't have the best way to probe subconsciousness. So there should be a new way if we can have, to probe subconsciousness, we can continue our study. Otherwise, I think we don't have, the big progress with that direction.
Do you think that your CCC task could also be helpful for that? I mean, can you think
No, that's
constellation?
with the cognitive control. Is not subconsciousness. It's purely, we argued in that paper, it's consciousness.
But can you see a situation that would be used to probe, things that are under the threshold of consciousness?
We failed to show that. Basically, we show that when you are not seeing, for example, the flanker conflict or the other disturbance, information, so you don't have the effect in your brain. So basically, when you see it, you are aware of it, you have the conflict effect. In that sense, we argue that the cognitive control is not subconscious. It should be consciousness related.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the work that I did very early on was about looking at people who are sleep deprived, and now I'm beginning to look at people who are getting small amounts of mind altering drugs. And my adventures with hypnosis and things like that have shown me that you can actually do very strange things to the human brain. Do you feel, or do you think that we are at a point in our research where we're going to have some kind of a major breakthrough in understanding processes that are under our level of awareness? Do you think that we're close to making some kind of a understanding into that, or do you think that this is just something that is very very diffusive and difficult to tell when we will ever understand it well?
So I understand the consciousness a little bit differently. So people that argue about, for example, the difference, or no, the argue about the consciousness. Why not consciousness? This about the difference between attention and the consciousness, or they mix attention as a consciousness or consciousness as attention. So I just feel that, okay, the consciousness is the product, the final product of the attentional processing, right? So in that sense, okay, so we can focus on study, on the attention rather than focusing on the study of consciousness, and then we may have a better clue about the underlying brain structure or brain processes.
But you realize that there are some people out there, not just philosophers, also experimental people, who are saying that it's possible to have consciousness without attention, and it's possible to have lack of consciousness with attention. At least these are claims that people make, including people who are doing experiments in psychophysics and so on. These are very controversial claims, but they basically say that just by attention alone, we're not going to have enough information to go into these things.
Yeah, it depends on the definition of attention. For example, you define attention as high level something, and then for sure, okay, sometimes without attention you have the consciousness. But if you think about attention as the process of alerting, orienting, and then exact control of attention, then if they don't have a higher level exact control of attention, if not, okay, they may have the reflection of the orienting attention or like the alertness arousal. So in that sense, attention for sure, okay, not for sure, okay, I argue is involved in the consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think this is very helpful, and what I'm going to do, first of all, I look forward to your lecture tomorrow. I think that many of the things that you said here are very helpful, because what we're going to do is we're going to take them and sort of make like little vignettes of them and put them on a website where we are going to have all the visitors, all the people who come and visit and give talks, sort of talk a little bit about their previous work and what they did. So I want to thank you very much, Jin.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Okay.